everyone. Thank you for joining me once again, where people continue without let or hindrance to be wrong on the interwebs. It doesn't look like slowing down anytime soon, does it? This is Nicolas Verhoeven, whom I've dealt with before. For those who don't know, Nicolas is a student with no qualifications of any meaningful level to speak of whatsoever. He has a relatively successful YouTube channel for some reason. I've got no idea why. He also has a bunch of ideas about things which are not actually based in science, usually remotely. Anywho, let's hear what Nicolas has to say about calories, and I suspect it'll be wrong, hence making this video. This is something I haven't watched through, that's the caveat. This is my first time seeing it. This is my reaction off the cuff to Nicolas Verhoeven and his ideas about calories. He says experts are wrong. He might be right about that. Experts often are wrong. Anyway, let's hear it.
I can already feel the stampede of people ready to tell me off for my ignorance. But fortunately, I can't help myself.
That's apparent.
I have to speak up because everyone that believes calories are not created equal is wrong.
Okay, well, depends on your context and how you're going to justify that. Let's hear it.
Including Dr. Fung, Dr. Barry, and many other professionals. For a long time, it has struck me how many people believe calories don't matter.
Well, again, calories don't matter needs a context. If you mean as the thing that will determine one's body weight, body composition, those kind of things, then calories don't matter. But that's a very conceptual construct. A lot of people think it's quite a semantic argument. It really isn't. We'll get to the actual science if it becomes obvious that we need to deal with the actual science, because Nicolas gets the actual science wrong, which I suspect he will. So we'll give him the opportunity to do that before we jump all over him. That's fair, isn't it?
For a variety of reasons. And one of those main reasons is because calories are not equal. Meaning, if you were to take 100 calories of broccoli and compare it to 100 calories of donuts, they wouldn't be the same. But
well, they wouldn't in terms of the metabolic, physiological response to consuming those two boluses of food, or boli, isn't it, really? Is the plural of bolus, it's boli. So two of those, equally described as containing so-called 100 calories, so-called, that they won't be responded to the same way. Ergo, calories are not equal in the way they are interpreted by the human body. So, what are you going to say, Nicolas?
But that's incorrect.
No, it isn't, really. It depends on your context.
Are the same. So, to create the anti-equal calorie argument, let's hear Dr. Fung on the matter, and then I'll chime in and rebuff his points.
Rebuff. Will you? The word is rebut, not rebuff.
One of the top comments that would keep coming up was, did this doctor really just say that the calories in, calorie out model does not govern whether someone loses weight or gains weight? And so we're talking offline how there's really no receptors for calories in the body.
Yeah, and this is the thing that's very strange. So you take a concept from physics. So what calories is that they take a piece of steak or whatever, and they basically burn it and see how much energy it is. So you can determine how many calories are in a steak and a piece of broccoli or a piece of wood for that matter. So you just burn it and see how much physical energy there is. So the body has no...
Energy is not physical, Jason. Okay.
Receptors. It doesn't measure calories. It has no idea how many calories you eat. So if you eat a piece of wood, it might have 10,000 calories. But you're not going to absorb any of it because it goes right through you. If you eat steak, it's going to have a certain number of calories. If you drink cola, it's going to have a certain number of calories. If you drink Diet Cola, it's going to have 0 calories.
Close to, but not actually 0.
But the body doesn't actually know that because it has no way of measuring it. So it has no way of responding to it. So why would we think that this is a sort of an important concept? And the only reason we think that is because it's sort of been ingrained into us. But it's a concept of physics, and it's not a physiologic concept. If you put 100 calories of sugar in your mouth versus 100 calories of olive oil, the physiologic response is completely and utterly different.
Right. So Jason Fung is correct on that. Absolutely correct. Those two things are interpreted quite differently by the body. The body responds totally differently to those two things. They are both described as containing the same amount of so-called calories. Jason is correct.
So you put that oil into your mouth and drink it down, for example, and there's no insulin response, for example. You eat a brownie, which is the same number of calories, and insulin spikes way up. So the body responds to hormones. I mean, everything runs on hormones, thyroid hormone, insulin, all these different hormones, and that's how it knows what to do. So when it senses that you're taking in carbohydrates, for example, then insulin will go up. If it senses that protein is coming in, insulin will go up as well as something like mTOR.
It's also interesting to note that if you take artificial sweetener that contains basically no calories to speak of, to all intents and purposes, zero, your brain, when you taste that sweetness on your tongue, doesn't know it's not carbohydrate and it doesn't contain any so-called calories in need of absorption, and will still release the insulin nonetheless. Interesting, isn't it? So Jason is correct.
So there's different receptors for amino acids, there's different receptors for fat, there's different receptors. So if you eat fat, for example, you'll have cholecystokinin release. If you eat a lot of fibrous foods, you'll have stretch receptors in your stomach which are activated. So there are all these different things that the body does respond to, but calories is not one of them.
So
Correct.
a few things here. Dr. Fung claims 3 major points. First, that the body has no receptors for calories.
He is correct. That is absolutely, unassailably, definitely correct.
Only for nutrients like amino acids. Second, the concept of calories is one of physics,
Which it is. Jason is also unassailably correct about that statement.
not physiology.
Correct.
Third, olive oil and sugar at 100 calories each stimulate different hormones.
Which is also absolutely, unassailably correct.
So let's examine each one of these.
Please, Nicolas, please.
First, the body has no receptors for calories. He's absolutely right. The body truly has no receptors for calories.
There you go.
And to his point, there are receptors for nutrients like glucose and amino acids. I'll return to this point soon. His second point was that calories are a physics concept, not a physiological concept.
Correct again.
He's right here too. Calories originated in physics and was ported over to physiology.
Falsely.
Okay, I'll return to this one too. His final point is that olive oil and sugar generate different hormonal reactions
Also correct.
within the body. Man, he's 3 for 3. He's absolutely right again. Well then, Nick, why are we here? Why'd you waste my time clicking on this video if you're just going to agree with him? Because each one of those statements can be true, yet in totality, they create a false sense of knowledge.
No, they don't, Nicolas. Not at all.
Because they leave out key pieces of information that are critical for an accurate understanding of calories and
Well, this should be fun.
nutrients. We'll return to those in just a little while.
So you said, are you going to do it at any stage?
I'm not here to redefine calories or to espouse some conspiracy that no one knows about calories, but rather it's vital for you to understand how to bridge the gap between calories and the nutrients that you consume. They are closely intertwined.
Not really, Nicolas. That's the point. They are really very poorly intertwined, in fact, actually.
Grossly misrepresented by the calories aren't equal crowd.
No, that's a value judgment statement on your part, Nicolas, and it's false. It is perfectly correct to say that the relationship between calories and nutrient is loose at best. They are not close cousins. They are not well correlated at all, in fact.
So, yes, a calorie is still merely a unit of energy. It's
It's a unit of heat energy specifically, and only that. It is specifically, by definition, by measurement, and in every other way, very specifically a measurement of energy in the form of heat. Okay, what's next?
a measure of heat. but to make false equivalencies like Dr. Berry here leads to an improper.
Dr. Berry made no false equivalence that I'm aware of. What are you talking about, Nicolas?
Education.
Okay. Now there's this thing in your bathroom, probably on the floor, and it looks like this. Now, what does this thing measure? Does it measure energy?
Nope.
Or does it measure mass?
Yes.
Right? So in order for something to show up on the bathroom scale, it has to have mass.
Correct.
Now, energy does not have any mass.
Correct. None at all.
We currently know about.
Okay, so how do calories relate to fat gain, fat loss that you might experience?
They don't, Nicolas. That's the point. Only mass can change your mass. The only way to change your mass is to change some aspect of those things in your body that have mass, and energy does not have mass. Now, when I went to school, Nicolas, any number whatsoever added to by any number of zeros or subtracted any number of zeros, leave the original number unchanged. Energy cannot affect your mass or your body composition or your physical dimensions in any way. We're done. You're not, though. What else have you got?
The scale.
Do you ever wish you had a creative collaborator to help you brainstorm and develop your ideas?
The food that you consume is made of nutrients, which are molecules with a specific chemical structure.
Yes.
You've heard them before: carbohydrates, proteins, and lipids, or nutrient fat. But for our discussion, I'm going to use the word lipid to not confuse with our fat cells. So you consume a food, it ends up in your digestive system and is eventually broken down into those constituent nutrients. The simplest form of carbohydrate, the simplest form of protein, and the simplest form of lipid.
Well, not necessarily on the protein one. Many branch chain amino acids, peptides survive the stomach and intestinal system and are absorbed as such. So to be strictly correct, just to be purely as pedantic as possible, Nicolas, not true for proteins. Okay.
They get absorbed by your intestinal system and are now found in your circulatory system, your bloodstream, and your lymphatic system. These molecules are now coursing through your circulation until they get snatched up by your various tissues, like muscle, kidneys, liver, fat, and so on. So at this point, we still haven't mentioned calories.
That's because they are completely irrelevant, Nicolas.
Because to Dr. Berry's point, we're discussing mass, the literal nutrient molecules themselves.
Correct, because that's the only thing that can affect your mass, your body composition, or your spatial dimension. That and the weight of water in your body, which is variable as well. Okay? Strictly speaking, the only way to change your mass is to add or to remove mass, not energy.
We'll get to the calories, though.
Please get to the calories.
Now, those nutrient molecules are found inside your cells that make up each of your tissues. There, they can undergo metabolism. So let's take a carbohydrate, which in its simplest form is called a monosaccharide, or you might know it as glucose, blood sugar.
It might be fructose as well.
Glucose has entered your cell and interacts with an enzyme called hexokinase in most of your cells. This first interaction changes the molecular structure of glucose and begins its journey down metabolism, known as glycolysis. Its molecular structure is changed over and over again until it barely resembles the glucose molecule that you consumed in your food.
Yeah, to break all of this down, at the end of the day, what you end up with, when it's been fully metabolized, fully oxidized, you end up with carbon dioxide and water. I don't know why Nicolas is running us through a basic metabolism lesson here. I don't really see what the relevance is, other than to absolutely bolster the point that the things involved in your metabolism are molecules of mass, not energy. which is a construct, a concept, a tool, an idea, a thing to help us explain something that we cannot otherwise explain. Okay? It can't actually be directly measured. The only way you can measure energy, so-called, is to actually measure the effects of so-called energy on mass, like heat. That is the effect of the so-called heat energy on mass that's been heated by that so-called energy. Okay, we actually know what form that energy takes that heats that water when you do burn something inside a bomb calorimeter and that heats up the water. It's photons, disturbances in the electromagnetic field. Okay, rest mass, 0. Can they be brought to mass? Brought to rest? No. They move at the speed of light at all times. So therefore you can't consume them, control them, take them in. Neither can you so-called spend them. You can't burn them because they don't burn. They are disturbances in the electromagnetic field. That's what they are. No spatial dimension, no mass, no weight. We're done. Absolutely done with the calorie. It is an inappropriate measurement for use in the context of human physiology, or physiology of any animal, actually. Okay?
That molecule, now known as pyruvate, enters your mitochondria. Yes, the powerhouse of the cell. And there it's further converted into many other molecules by breaking and twisting and reshaping the molecular structure until it is turned into a new molecule called NADH.
No, that is not what occurs at all, Nicolas. No. False. Pyruvate is converted to carbon dioxide and water. Some of the hydrogens from that molecule are sequestered, annexed, if you like, by NAD plus to form NADH, and then those H's are transferred to the electron transport chain, where they are split into protons and electrons across the membrane, and then the attractive electromagnetic force, another form of energy, if you like, is harnessed to cause those things to react exothermically with oxygen. And it's that release of Gibbs free energy which is encapsulated and used by the mitochondria to produce ATP from ADP plus PI. Okay? At the end of the day, energy is transferred around between those things in different forms, but energy is a construct. Energy has no mass, and energy has no effect at all on the amount of mass present whatsoever. The stoichiometry of all of those chemical reactions leads us to the exact same amount of mass that we started with. Now, over time, the body loses some of the mass that was consumed in the form of food by way of urinating out the water that was thus generated, sweating out the water that was thus generated. Sometimes it comes out in tears, saliva, which may be expectorated, for example. Other insensible losses like water vapor at the lungs during breathing. That's where the mass is lost there. And the carbon dioxide is breathed out at the lungs according to its concentration gradient, with some effect due to some capacitance of the tissues for the carbon dioxide, which is variable. Okay? That is how the mass is lost. And only that way in terms of the metabolic processes. All right? Nothing to do with the energy at all. Remember, energy is a construct, a tool, a useful way of describing and understanding something that we otherwise cannot. The motive force to do work. An internally consistent, but not externally consistent definition Okay, what's next?
Still no calories, right?
Correct, still no calories.
Nope. No mention of calories.
Correct, because they're not relevant.
But we're about to get there.
No, we're not, Nicholas. You're about to get it wrong, I suspect, because the only way you could possibly connect calories to the change in weight of a human body through metabolism is by getting it wrong. There is no other explanation.
Is still just the manipulation of mass from one form to another. And
Correct.
ADH then interacts with proteins in the mitochondria, known as the electron transport chain. And those proteins, through a series of reactions, produce our final molecule of interest, adenosine triphosphate, ATP. So, what's so special about ATP? Well, it's the energy currency of the cell.
It's thought of as the energy currency of the cell because when ATP is hydrolyzed to do cellular work, that releases Gibbs free energy, and it's that Gibbs free energy which is encapsulated and used for whatever metabolic process that requires motive force. And it is split to ADP plus PI, leaving the mass still unchanged. Completely unchanged still, Nicholas. Okay?
Whoa, hold on. We just used the word energy.
Yeah, we did. And it's a construct still, it's a concept still, it's a tool to understand something that we otherwise can't still, and it still has exactly the same effect on mass as it had beforehand, Nicholas, which is still none.
Are we close to calories?
No. Nowhere near it. Still.
We are.
No, Nicholas. Still.
If we look at the structure of ATP, it is a molecule of adenosine attached to...
Structure? You mean its mass, Nicholas? The things that make up its mass. See that? An adenosine molecule and 3 inorganic phosphate molecules in a chain. Cool.
The 3 phosphate molecules.
So 1, 2, 3, 4 components to that overall molecule, if you like. Think of those 3 carbon rings as 1 unit and the phosphates as a unit. So that's 1, 2, 3, 4 units of mass. Cool.
But it's the attachment points between the phosphates and the adenosine that are of the greatest interest.
Yes, because there is potential chemical energy there.
Because it's here that we bridge the gap between mass and energy.
Not really, Nicholas. Still, it's still a construct and a tool to help us understand something we otherwise can't.
The bonds that keep phosphate molecules bound to adenosine are called high-energy bonds.
Yes.
So if you break the bond releasing 1 or more phosphates, you unleash energy.
Yes, but what effect does that have on the mass that's present, Nicholas? 1, 2, 3, 4 units. Still. Okay?
Was trapped. That energy can be detected as heat. So
it could be if it was allowed to escape as heat entropy. However, an amount of it is encapsulated and used for metabolic process. Gibbs-free energy. It only becomes a calorie released when it is allowed to escape to entropy. The human system is not 100% efficient. We don't capture all the energy released by the hydrolysis of ATP when it's hydrolyzed. Some of it escapes, yes, absolutely, in the form of calories, heat entropy loss, which still has what effect on the mass of the body, by the way, Nicholas? None. Because any amount of mass that your body contains, minus any amount of zeros, photons of light, basically, leaves that mass completely unchanged. Still. What am I missing, boys and girls?
Scientists measure the amount of heat your body produces as a measure of these bonds being...
Correct. Only it's inaccurate, isn't it? For the reasons I've just explained.
Broken millions upon millions of times per second.
Yeah, but if you're measuring someone's heat output, you're only measuring that proportion of the energy released which is allowed to escape to entropy. and is not encaptured for metabolic process. And it still has no effect on mass, does it? None.
And that measure is calories.
Yes. But it doesn't actually have anything to do with the so-called energy expenditure that the human body is undertaking, does it, Nicolas? No. So neither can you measure calories in accurately, nor out. So calories in, calories out is busted. Still.
It's a proxy measure of the energy.
You mean it's poxy measure? Poxy. Ridiculous, nonsensical, garbage, anti-scientific, in fact. Rubbish.
Utilization of your cell. And if you multiply that out billions of times of your entire body of cells, ultimately ATP is the bridge between mass and energies.
No, it isn't.
So to speak.
No, that's an interpretation, and it's a feeble one, Nicolas, which is really no surprise given your level, frankly, which, by the way, is student. Okay?
However, not all nutrients are sent down the metabolic pathway to
There you go.
create ATP.
And yet, they're still listed to have an amount of calories, even though, in effect, they're never going to be used for that purpose, like most protein that you consume, so long as you don't overeat protein. Okay?
And some nutrient molecules are stored or used for other functions. That's where the dreaded energy balance equation comes in.
That's irrelevant to your mass. The way to determine what's likely to happen in someone's mass is mass in, mass out, not energy in, energy out. Nicolas, still. Here are some references that agree with it, with what I've just said. Okay, mass in, mass out, not energy in, energy out. Good. If you want to take this up, why don't you argue it out with those authors, Nicolas, who have published their works in peer-reviewed journals establishing their posit? Okay?
We use the energy balance equation as a proxy for the balance of mass.
Why? It's inaccurate, it's inappropriate, it's vastly erroneous to do so conceptually and in practice. The only way to use this concept to lose fat off your body is to vastly, grossly, hugely undereat for a significant period of time, which is absolutely contraindicated for health. Short, medium, and long term. It's a bad idea. You should not do that. Okay? Because the error is so vast in getting any idea of how much so-called calories you've actually so-called consumed and so-called spent, you have to, in order to swamp that error, you have to so grossly, vastly undereat that it becomes dangerous for your health, basically. And it causes mental illness, disordered eating, eating disorders, all of that kind of stuff, Nicolas, because it's a false prophet. It's a false idol. It's an idea that does not work. That's why we need to put this thing to bed fully and finally for all time. And that's why people like yourself, who basically are not qualified to comment on this topic whatsoever, should not do so. Okay?
Stated differently, we use calories.
No, we don't. Not at all. Calories are waste energy that we did not use precisely by definition that we've just understood, hopefully. What we use is Gibbs-free energy, chemical energy. Okay? You haven't even got the basics right here, Nicolas. It's embarrassing for you, son.
Because they relate to the nutrient molecules.
No, they don't. No.
A mass.
No, very, very poorly. For a start, Nicolas, nutrition labels are allowed to be out by 20% plus or minus. So a range of 40% out is what they're allowed to be. Okay? That's before you look at thermic effect of food and the fact that many molecules of food are not used for energy in the way that you're talking about, not oxidized through the mitochondria at all, but in fact incorporated into body structures, ergo in effect containing no calories at all. The only time a calorie exists is when it is released. Until then, it does not exist. It's a potential form of, a so-called form of potential so-called energy, which again is a construct. Potential energy. Goodness me. That's another rabbit hole for another day.
Explained before. And we are consuming more calories.
We are not consuming any calories at all. You cannot consume photons. They cannot be brought to rest. They move at the speed c, the speed of light. Basically, to all intents and purposes, 300,000 kilometers per second, Nicolas. At all times. According to all observers in every inertial frame of reference. You cannot consume them. Sorry, what's next?
And our body burns.
God, burns? No. Burning is not what you have a metabolic system, Nicolas. You don't have a steam engine inside of you. Okay?
ATP reactions.
That's not burning. At all.
Then we are consuming more mass than our body needs to convert into energy.
Your body doesn't convert mass into energy. We've covered that. The amount of mass that remains once all the metabolic reactions have occurred is unchanged. The exact number of carbons, hydrogens, oxygens, nitrogens, phosphates, and everything else, adenosines and everything involved in all of that, is unchanged by all of the reactions. It is still all there. No, you do not convert food into energy, Nicolas. No.
So, what does it do with that mass?
Well, we've covered that.
Stores it in a variety of places, but you're probably most familiar with body fat. So let's say you need 2,000 calories worth of energy to maintain your bodily function.
You don't need any calories to maintain your bodily function. You need a certain amount of mass in the form of oxidizable substrate. Mostly in the form of, if you're sensible and following a species-appropriate diet, mostly in the form of fat, animal fat. If you are behooving for some reason to the standard ideas around nutrition, which are false, you're probably also piling in a bunch of unnecessary, actually contraindicated, dangerous, toxic carbohydrates as well, which can be used for that purpose. And you should also be taking in an amount of protein such that the protein balance in your body remains stable over time, or indeed if you are undertaking hypertrophy training, that it goes up. And there will be a correct amount of protein for you individually on that basis. That protein is generally not oxidized for energy. Any additional protein above what your body requires will be transmuted to sugar, and ergo can be then either oxidized or indeed further metabolized to fat and stored. That way, sure. But that's nothing whatever to do with energy. It's to do with mass balance, Nicolas, still.
That translates to your cells requiring that amount of ATP to generate proteins, to allow ATP-dependent enzyme reactions to occur, to move things within and between the cells, and many other functions that allow the cell to survive.
Yes, and ATP is the molecule which is used to release the Gibbs free energy, which is used by the cells to cause these effects to occur, not calories, which again are only detectable, measurable, and only exist when those photons are allowed to escape to entropy, and thus are not being used by the body at all, in fact. Okay?
If you are not consuming the nutrient molecules to feed your cells so that they can generate the ATP like we described before, your fat cells, as one example, release stored nutrient molecules, in this case lipids, into circulation to feed the downstream cells and allow them the ability to generate the necessary ATP.
Yes, we understand this, Nicolas.
Of course, we don't say, I need to eat 1,500 calories worth of nutrient molecules to lose body fat.
Well, that's what a lot of people do, in fact, say, Nicholas. That's the whole point. And that's why we are lambasting those people. Because you cannot consume calories, neither can you spend them. Okay? They are a form of energy that passes through your being momentarily when they are released to entropy, and only then. Until then, they did not exist as such. Okay? The thing about photons being massless is they can be brought out of the electromagnetic field from nowhere. From nowhere. In fact, that's a fact of physics you might want to look up, Nicholas. Okay. What's next?
We say, I need to cut my calories by 500.
Yeah, but that's false. And that's a stupid thing to do. That's vastly, grossly undereating, and that will lead you to an increased likelihood, it seems, of deleterious health outcome. It will damage your metabolism. It will damage the systems of your body. Your body will react to that very, very negatively. It is not a good idea.
Or, I need to eat 1,500 calories.
No. Again, same deal. For most people, 1,500 will not be sufficient if the calorie is what you're using as a gauge of the mass of food. It also depends very much on how that food is made up, as we covered right at the very beginning of this video, Nicholas. Depends on whether those 1,500 calories are in one form or another as to how the body will respond to them, doesn't it? Still.
And that deficit in energy-capable nutrient molecules.
No. Just a deficit in mass. If you're losing mass, it's because you have a deficit in the mass that you're taking in the right forms. Okay? Not energy. Nothing to do with energy, Nicholas. Still.
Leads your body to rely on the stored levels to make up the difference and bump you back up to 2,000 calories expended.
No, because you still can't expend calories.
However, taking the mass out of your body fat to feed your other cells like muscle, liver, etc., to turn that mass into energy capable
Still doesn't happen.
ATP leads your body fat to shrink. This is
No, it leads to a lower number of fat molecules stored in your adipose tissue because when they are oxidized to produce ATP, the resultant carbon dioxide and water is at some point expelled from the body. It is a loss of mass through that process. There is no change to the ADP, PI, or ATP mass. It's still unchanged, Nicholas. Ergo, it is nothing to do with energy. Still.
How the energy balance equation relates.
No, the calorie balance idea is a false idea. The energy balance idea is a false equivalence. It's an approximation of the mass balance equation, which is correct, and it's a very poor approximation. That's the point here. If you want to get an accurate gauge on the mass balance, then you look at mass in its various forms, Nicholas, not so-called energy, a construct. God, this is really straightforward, I would have thought. Clearly, not for this boy. And many others, he's not the only one. To be fair to him, he's not the only one laboring under this false misapprehension. Still.
It's to food, body fat, mass, what have you. Now, hold on. I realize things aren't that simple in the real world of hunger, stress, hormones, and much...
Are you all right, by the way, Nicholas? Are you okay, son? I'm concerned. Do I need to call your mum?
Much more. But I'm only trying to provide the physiological link between your fat loss and gain and this supposedly purely physics principle.
It is purely a physics principle still. It still doesn't apply to what the human metabolic system does. We are not a steam engine. Heat does not drive what our body does. Chemical reactions do. That is a different form of energy exchange. How is this difficult to understand, son? Literally, if you were sat in my human metabolism class this semester, you'd be back next semester to repeat the course, Nicolas. You would get an F for fail. Come back and try again. I do not understand where you are failing to understand this.
I hope that now you understand their...
I did before you started speaking, Nicolas, much better than you do. And now everyone that's watched this video hopefully does really understand. I know I've covered this topic a number of times, but you know, sometimes it takes 5, 6, 7 different explanations of a concept before people will get it. Okay? Rather than some people, Nicolas, who hear something once maybe and believe themselves to be an expert in that then, therefore, and know all about it, and then make videos to others where they pass on false information, misinformation, half information, partial information, whatever. Misleads people, Nicolas. It's very common for young people like yourself with no actual credentials to make this kind of mistake. So I don't blame you for it, but I do suggest that you really need to, number one, get your ego in check and in whack, and concentrate on what you should be concentrating on, son, your studies, because you are a student, remember? Okay? You need to concentrate on what you're doing to pass your credentials so that then you can start to actually gain some real-world experience, which, once you've got your credentialing and your real-world experience, might qualify you for this discussion. In the meantime, son, go and be a student. Is that clear? I mean, please, anybody correct me if you think I've got anything wrong there.
Closely intertwined.
Well, try and correct me. Good luck.
While fat loss is a literal loss of mass.
Yes, for the reasons I've outlined, and you haven't, Nicolas. You think, or you seem to think, by way of implying that it's so and even stating that it's so, that food is converted into ATP. No, it isn't. That's not what happens at all, son. That's why you get an F for metabolism and energetics and have to come back next semester.
The energy way of understanding it is an excellent way to describe the process.
No, it isn't. It's a very, very poor way of describing it. That's why it's so inaccurate and so inappropriate. Let's move on.
Although you'd also be right by calling it the mass balance equation if you prefer.
You'd only be right by calling it that because that's the only thing it is when you're talking about the balance of fat on someone's body, the balance of, well, anything on someone's body composition, someone's weight, someone's dimensions, all of it. They are all mass balance activities, not energy, Nicolas. The energy analogy is false.
Okay, so now we should have an understanding of how nutrient molecules are related to energy.
No, we don't from what you said, Nicolas, because you got it wrong. You said food molecules are converted to ATP. They still aren't.
But as I briefly put the brakes on, it's also true that different foods affect us differently.
Yes. Ergo, all calories, so-called, are not equal, which you said was false at the beginning of your video. And it's still true, isn't it, Nicolas?
Let's take that on a basic level.
Remember you were going to correct Jason Fung about something? Of those 3 points he quite correctly made? Which one of those 3 points have you corrected, Nicolas? Which one? None of them. What's next?
The comparison of lipids, remember that's dietary fat, and carbohydrates. The literal molecular structure of lipids.
Stop using the word literally so often, Nicolas. It literally adds nothing to the sentence the power of the sentence or anything the sentence has to say on any topic. Okay? It's just a noise. It's like saying like all the time, like this and like that, like literally. Okay? Knock it off.
Is extremely different from carbohydrates, like glucose. So it's...
No. Fats are extremely different from carbohydrates. Well, it depends on your context, really. If you look at what's in them, C's, H's, and O's, they're pretty similar in that respect. If you look at the structure of the molecules, well, they're quite different. You're right. Be clear about what you're saying, Nicolas. Make your message clear and unequivocal. Make your arguments unassailable, because currently, son, they're not. I've assailed them very easily, haven't I?
Stands to reason that they'd have different effects in the body, and this also bears out the research. For example, glucose stimulates insulin, and lipids have much less of an effect. That's one of a myriad examples, without even getting into the types of...
Right, so all calories are not created equal then. Good.
Lipids, the types of carbohydrates, genetics, and many other facets that complicate...
Oh, types of carbohydrates, you say? Well, that's another can of worms for another day, I suspect. I'm really worried, Nicolas. I'm really worried about what I'm seeing here. What's going on, son? Are you eating well? I know you're not, based on what I've heard you say about nutrition. Get your mum to contact me. I'd like to have a word with her, Nicolas. I really would. We need to get this squared away. Otherwise, you could do some irreversible damage to your health, frankly.
The physiology of our lives. I am absolutely not saying calories are the only consideration when it comes to body fat loss.
They're not a consideration at all, Nicolas. I've covered that.
But what I am saying is that calories are foundational to fat.
No, they're not.
Fat loss.
No, they're not. They've got nothing to do with it still.
And must be taken into account.
No, Nicolas, false. Wrong. Repeat the course next semester.
One way or another.
No.
Yet,
mass in, mass out is what you need to track.
That gives us a background on calories, but it doesn't address Dr. Fung's criticisms.
Right. So all of that was a waste of time, and you got it wrong, as I thought you would.
So why did I agree with his points, yet still disagree due to the incompleteness?
Because, Nicolas, you're a Dunning-Kruger sufferer. And for those that don't know what that means, Dunning-Kruger is a syndrome suffered by many people of Nicolas's generation, and not just his generation, but that seems to be highly prevalent in his, where these are people with such an awesome, such a stunning degree of incompetence that they are unable to even grasp the level of their own incompetence. They think themselves not only competent, but expert in fields that they know nothing whatever about. It's born of a generation who have been brought up to believe that every child should win a prize, you should get a certificate just for showing up, and that your opinion is just as valid as the next person's. It's not, Nicolas, I'm sorry. Okay? I'm sorry to be the bearer of tough love, but those are the facts. Your opinion is not as valid as someone who is competent in this field, because you're not. Okay?
His first point, as a reminder, is that we don't have receptors for calories.
Which is still correct.
That's, again, true. However, we have many receptors for ATP.
Not really. No. They're not receptors so much as things that are coupled with ATP in various reactions. It's the ATP that provides the motive force for those reactions to occur, the activation energy that's required, and it's provided by the release of Gibbs free energy from the hydrolysis of the ATP molecule. Okay? We've covered this, leaving the mass unchanged, by the way, still.
Like those found on the master molecules like mTOR, AMPK, and others. So our cells can sense their energetic state by sensing the amount of ATP present.
If you mean that there are some things that bind to ATP molecules, sure, but that's not so much a receptor as an interaction in and of itself. It's a chemical interaction. It's the sharing of valence electrons, turning two molecules ostensibly into one. Still a chemical reaction, still doesn't change the mass, and still has nothing whatever to do with energy. And you could say it senses the energetic state of the cell, and you'd be wrong. What it's sensing is the level of ATP, which is still mass and still a chemical species and not energy in and of itself. Okay? What's next?
If not through calories, then by the molecular creator.
Right, so molecules, it's a receptor for ATP, not for calories. Still.
Calories, ATP. His second criticism was that calories are a physics concept.
Which they still are, which has been appropriated incorrectly by the biological fraternity as an appropriate description of what occurs in the human metabolic system. It isn't. Still.
Not a physiological one. Again, true to a degree.
No, true, absolutely. Still.
But as we just went over, they're tightly locked together.
No, they're not still. They are still loosely locked. They are still poor correlates. It is still a vastly, grossly inaccurate means of determining the balance of what's occurring in the human body. Vastly, vastly inferior to the appropriate model, which is still mass-based. Okay?
And cannot be separated.
They can be separated. Absolutely, and are separated. Absolutely, Nicolas. Repeat the course next semester. Hopefully this time with your ears open so that you actually learn something.
Even if physiology is also inundated with many, many other variables. His third critique is that olive oil and sugar cause different hormonal reactions.
But still true.
Again, absolutely true.
Still, yes.
As I explained earlier, the hormonal response is different due to the molecular structure.
Right, so not the energy status. Good.
Among other reasons like genetics, pathology, and more.
Sure.
None of these are arguments that calories are not equal.
Yes, they are. Because you're suggesting that the human body, if you're saying calories are equal in the context of human physiology, by lack of a clear statement to the contrary, you are implying that the human body should therefore respond equally to calories irrespective of their source, which is demonstrably false. Still, Nicolas.
Why? Because calories, as we described earlier, are a measure of the heat produced by the ATP reactions.
No, they're not. Not at all.
And regardless of starting molecule used to generate that ATP, be it an unsaturated lipid from the olive oil or a glucose molecule from the sugar, in calorie-equated scenarios, they both end up as the same end product.
Can you see how many steps you're missing there, Nicolas? Clearly you can't. How many steps of logic you're missing there or ignoring for some reason. Dear, oh dear, oh dear. Oh, we've covered it, I think, in the video in enough detail. I think people get it. Anyone with 3 brain cells gets it.
ATP and the same amount of that end product. The ATP garnered from the sugar is the same ATP created from the lipids, just through different metabolic pathways.
No, through the same one, in fact. Pretty much from the point of acetyl coenzyme A onwards. Because it all converges before the ATP is generated. So ATP is generated from the same thing. It's generated from the activities of the Krebs cycle, which is driven by the first intermediary, if you like to think of it as the first, that being acetyl coenzyme A. You could think of all the intermediaries of the TCA cycle as equally the first one. There are ins and outs for all those various intermediaries, if you like, through anaplerosis and cataplerosis, sure. But ostensibly what happens is the Krebs cycle cleaves hydrogens off carbon skeletons, which are all fed into the cycle in the form of acetyl coenzyme A. Well, most of them, not all of them, in fact, because there are other ways in as well, other minor ways in to feed in through that pathway. So it really doesn't make any difference from that point. Your point falls flat is what I'm saying, Nicolas. It's not really a good point or a relevant point at all. Okay?
Glycolysis for sugar and beta oxidation for lipids.
Sure, okay, fine, but that's irrelevant to anything, Nicolas. That doesn't mean a calorie is a calorie, because you don't consume acetyl coenzyme A. You consume so-called calories, which you can't do still, in the different forms of foods, and because of the different pathways that lead to acetyl coenzyme A, and the different hormonal reactions to the intake of those different things along those pathways, they are not the same in terms of so-called energy that you would derive. Okay? A calorie is not a calorie in terms of how it is interpreted, how the foods are interpreted, which is exactly, in fact, what really is going on. The body is not interpreting calories at all. You've entirely missed the whole boat here, Nicolas, completely.
But when you use that ATP and break the phosphate off, the energy release is indistinguishable, and therefore all calories are created equal.
You're making a semantic argument, Nicolas, which falls on its face. By definition of what a calorie is a unit of energy in the form of a photon, which interacts energetically when it encounters a molecule of water around a bomb calorimeter, for example, and excites that water molecule so that it vibrates more, rotates more, or is translocated, or all three. That is what we detect as heat. That is what is measured. That is what a calorie is. Yes, they're all equal in that regard. But metabolically, you're saying we consume calories, which we don't. But if you were right and we did, then you would have to, therefore, so if you're saying all calories are equal, that has to mean both in and out, doesn't it? You're only looking at the outside. The inside, they're not the same. Okay? Pretty straightforward. Pretty straightforward indeed to understand, I would have thought. I think that's the simplest way of putting it. I hope that's gone up some flagpoles.
Because the measured heat is the same.
Yes, but that's only the out part. The in part, fats, carbohydrates, protein, all reacted to differently by the body, ergo, all supplied different amounts of calories for the same mass of stuff. Okay? And nutrition labels don't get that right. They say 9 kilocalories per gram of fat, which is an approximation, and it's allowed to be 20% out in any given thing. That says 4 kilocalories per gram of carbohydrate, which again is an approximation and allowed to be out. And it says the same 4 kilocalories of energy per gram of protein, which is vastly, grossly, hugely wrong. A, because of the thermic effect being more like 30% and less like 5 to 10. And because most protein that you consume, so long as you don't overconsume protein, is not oxidized at all, and therefore, in effect, is not a source of calories. No calories are released. But still it says 4 on the label, for example. Okay? So are all calories the same? No. Because you're not a steam engine. You're not the little engine that could. You're the little boy who thought he could, Nicolas. That's one of the things I want to talk to your mum about. Getting your ego in check as well as your health. Because, wow. Right. How are you going to sum up?
However, I am not saying that nutrients are equal.
Right. But we're describing nutrients as calories, aren't we? Because did you see the first part of that CICO thing? That's the CI, calories in, not nutrient. Is it nutrients in, calories out? No. The argument is calories in, calories out. It's wrong, isn't it, Nicolas? You've just given us the reason right there. Nutrients are not equal. Okay, thanks. All right?
The nutrients are very different.
Yes.
Normalized, calories same, nutrients different. I realize one of the critiques coming my way is that this is all semantics. But I cannot express to you how much I vehemently disagree.
It doesn't matter how much you disagree. You're still wrong, Nicolas. Remember, your opinion is not as valid as an actual expert's, because you're not an actual expert, Nicolas. You are a student. Remember? One who's repeating the course next semester if I'm in charge. Okay?
If no one was going to make that argument, that I'm disagreeing with myself. But
I did make the argument, because it is a semantic argument that you're attempting to make here. Conceptually, you are in error, Nicolas. You have missed the boat entirely. Still.
I have received that feedback before. So
why didn't you listen, son? Why didn't you listen?
I'll assume that it would be levied here as well.
There you go. Good assumption.
If we are not crystal clear about the foundational elements of physiology,
which you're not, Nicolas, you said foods are turned into ATP. They're not. Still. Okay? For example, that's not only not crystal clear, it's false. Okay?
Nutrition, then we are stacking knowledge on foundations of information that are weak and
are we, Nicolas? Really?
Cracked.
Yes. Some of us are.
And we open the doorways to thought processes that should have stayed closed. This sends us
all thought processes should be entertained, Nicolas. Okay? That's how you get to be a rounded professional who is competent and able to dismiss ideas that are false because you have considered them.
Gray in a veritable ocean of information that we have yet to learn. How can we...
Well, some of us have a lot to learn still, Nicolas. Sure. Absolutely. Some of us are decades down the pathway of having already learned the fundamentals and the basics and having learned how to put the argument together correctly in a robust and correct fashion. That is a skill you are yet to learn, obviously.
Move forward to understand greater complexity in nutrition if everyone is fragmented on the definitions of our very foundations.
But we're not, Nicolas. We are in accord as to the definitions of what is a calorie. The thing that's at moot here is how that relates to human physiology in any way. I have presented my argument here today, again, not for the first time, showing that I am unassailable and correct, and that you are unassailably incorrect in your interpretation, which is not mature or correct. Okay? I'm sorry about that.
I would argue that we can't, and that's one of the reasons that we see so much disagreement. The sooner that we lock down our base understanding from the macro to the micro, being able to trace our thoughts in and out of our cells to the full body, we will be able to passionately...
This is now just rhetoric from Nicolas talking about how things ought to be in an ideal world in the face of the unassailable fact that he has just fallen foul of everything he is now putting forward as the ideal himself in the last 18 minutes or so of his video. Over the last just over an hour that I've been explaining his errors. This is what I mean by Dunning-Kruger. This is a boy who cannot even comprehend the level of his own incompetence. It's stunning to me. Fascinating, even.
We discuss more complex nutrition topics.
Yeah, but Nicolas, if you don't understand that food isn't turned into ATP, how can you possibly qualify to talk about more complex ideas? Explain that to me. First principles, you have to get those right first, surely. However, as I said, you have an opportunity to repeat the course next semester and get your first principles correct, from which point you will then be able to build your house on a foundation stone that will stand up to the pressure, because your current house is one of cards. Okay?
Speaking the same foundational language. Finally, I'd like to add that I've hit the major points, but there's significant...
No, you haven't. You've missed every single one, Nicolas, by a mile. Your scorecard is empty. Nil point.
Amounts that I've purposely left out. Yet none of those omissions, like the fact that glycolysis also generates ATP independent of mitochondria, or that there are different caloric expenditures to break down different foods in the intestine.
There are no caloric expenditures. Calories are heat released to entropy, i.e. not used, i.e. not expended by the human body still. Okay?
Make any difference on the concepts explained.
You're right, they don't. But the concepts as you've put them forward are false, Nicolas, still.
Only layers of complexity that are unnecessary to the calorie discussion, but worthy of separate conversations without confusing this discussion.
Yeah, but they're worthy of conversations led by people who are competent, Nicolas, which, as I've said, does not include you at this stage of your life. You have a lot of work to do. You are in catch-up. Unfortunately, you've opened your mouth publicly on a number of occasions on topics that you are incompetent to speak about, and the damage done by you doing so is near irreversible at this point. Your credibility is in the toilet, son. Okay? It's a real shame for you. And it comes from your place of arrogance. You should remain silent publicly until you are a bona fide, genuine expert. That's what a lot of people get wrong here on the interwebs. They think their opinion is valid too. No, it isn't. Sorry about that.
Discussion. If you made it to this point, then I thank you for your patience, and I hope that...
You're welcome. It really was quite trying, Nicolas, to be honest with you. You really need to do a lot better. A lot better.
I appreciate that you ended up watching it through, and I'd certainly recommend some of my other content.
I wouldn't.
If you're so inclined to learn more.
No. If you're so inclined to be misled by a Dunning-Kruger sufferer who is going to lead you up the garden path and tell you things that are fundamentally wrong, absolutely listen to more of Nicolas's inane rantings. Absolutely, go ahead. That's Dunning-Kruger for you. That's Darwin in action. And if you want to go that way, well, you deserve everything you get from it, frankly. In the meantime, people that want to follow an actual expert, bona fide and established as such, will come across to my channel and they will continue their journey of discovery with me, Nicolas. You should too, son. You really would learn a lot if you could get your ego in check and work out that you actually where your place is in the hierarchy of the academic fraternity, for want of a better word. Okay? The rest of you, you know the drill. Don't let the door hit you in the backside on the way out. Clean up the room after you. Don't leave your mess behind for your mum. See you next time, when someone else will be wrong on the interwebs, because it really doesn't look like slowing down, does it? See you then.